Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our Green Jam. Every other week, we host these sessions for you, people working in independent agencies. My name's Matt, and I'm the MD of the Alliance of Independent Agencies. So a huge welcome to you. I'll explain very briefly about the event, and then I'm going to pass over to our guest presenter, Helen. So I joined the Alliance of Independent Agencies a month ago. And before that, I was working for the Drum. And the reason I've mentioned that is because this subject is very close to my heart. And it's something that I've tried to remain involved in for quite some time, specifically over the past couple of years. And last year, we embarked on a piece of research because I tended to find that most agencies I went into, there was a conversation around well-being and mental health of some sort. And the fact that there was a conversation I thought was great. And it's a conversation that's taking place at board level, which I thought was great. But like so many other things, it was very anecdotal. And so we embarked on a piece of research that was specifically aimed at people working in agencies. And I'm just going to run through some of the stats because we want to run it again this year. But I think it just highlights why events like this are really so important. So the research that we distributed last year was specific to people working in agencies. And there's some quite worrying points that we took from it. So 91% of people that took part in the research that said that they've suffered with regards to their mental health in the last 12 months. Now, we used a research company, specifically them, because they've run similar research across different industries, and we wanted to benchmark some of these findings that we got back in the figures. So digging down a little bit deeper into the reasons why that figure was so high. So the most common reason was just that there's too much to do. And you would have expected that. But the biggest gap between some of the benchmark figures, and this is like the wider working population, that was really interesting, that there was a question was not feeling very good at my job. 46% of people that work in agencies highlighted that as one of the factors that impact their negative mental health. And that's against a benchmark of 13% as the wider industry population. So there's some issues there that I think we need to address with people working in agencies. And as you dig further down, and we'll distribute the findings after this call, you kind of feel like it just was something that is just accepted. You know, I talked to some people that were running agencies and it'll be like, well, it's agency life. It's busy, it's hectic, you know, and there's almost like just gonna get on with it and just you have to accept it. That's how it is, which is absolutely not the case. There's a lot we can do to improve things. So for example, 35% against an industry benchmark of 19% just said that they wouldn't ever consider taking time off for reasons that were attached to their mental health as opposed to their physical health. So nearly double people in agencies wouldn't do that in comparison to the rest of the working population. But I'm going to end on a positive note, because the one area where we did outperform everybody else that worked in different industries, and we looked at research for across finance and travel, is that we talk about this a lot and that we have open conversations a lot, and we are trying to fix these issues more than what other industries seem to be doing. And that was really stood out. So 49% of people said that they feel comfortable in talking to their managers about their mental health if they're working in agencies, and that way outperformed that in other industries. So the fact that we're having these events and we're having open dialogue around the well-being and the mental health of people that work in agencies is really good. So that's why I think it's really important, because the stats don't lie. And what we need are more people. We need more people like Helen to come in and join us in these events, because Helen's going to take us through some kind of a session, a workshop, which is how you can create your own wellness plan. So a lot of our agenda at the Alliance is we try and adopt the prevention is better than a cure stance when it comes to these issues. And well, Helen, I'm not going to introduce you in any great detail because I'm going to let you do that, if that's okay. So I'll hand over to you. We don't have many rules. If you're listening, it's nice to see you all. So please leave your video on. I quite like seeing the faces, everybody else does. But please put yourself on mute. You can ask questions in the chat room. We can post some questions to Helen later on at the end. And Well, I think that's it from me. Helen, are you okay to take to the stage and introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you so much, Matt, and thank you everybody for joining today's session, where we're really going to focus on how we can build a wellbeing action plan. So I hope you've got a lovely cup of tea or a coffee or a glass of water, and you're relaxed and ready to really explore some of the content that I've got with you today. Just so you're clear on what we're going to be looking at. I mean, we're planning on this presentation lasting for about 45 to 50 minutes. I do encourage people to participate throughout the session, and I would encourage you to do that via the chat facility. So I will ask questions, and I hope that you feel okay to contribute to the conversation. And anytime you've got a question, just post it in the chat, and I will go back through at the end, or of course I'll open up the lines for anyone that wants to ask any questions in the real time. So let's get started. How happy are you? When was the last time you felt wildly happy? You woke up feeling energetic, feeling joyful, and really grateful for what you had around you. Now, we've had a really challenging few months, which is probably a polite way of putting it, really. But if someone asked you today if you were happy, what would you say? And on a scale of 1 to 10, just score yourself. So 1 being really, really unhappy, and 10 being on top of the world, like these people in this picture. And despite it being something all of us are working to achieve, this idea of happiness in one way or another, it's very difficult to answer. Because when we're asked this question, we may think about our existing relationships, what is happening in our lives at the moment, how successful we are in our specific career. There'll be lots of things that are happening that are contributing to us making the decision on how happy we are. And if I said, what would you need to do to raise that score just by 1? What would you need to change? What would need to happen? What could you do that would just change that score by 1? Maybe very little. It may be quite a lot. Perhaps it's easier to start with the question, what is happiness? Perhaps that seems like an odd question. But in the chat facility, just describe happiness for me in 1 word. Just in 1 word, what would you say happiness is? Is it money? Comfort? Safety, perhaps, in 1 word? Anyone feeling brave? Friends? Wonderful. Contentment? Optimism, perhaps. Peace? That's lovely. Exhilaration? Health? Family? Friendships? Complete? A smile? That's lovely. Security? So many different ways in which we can describe happiness. And the reality is that happiness is often made up of lots of different things. And it's unsurprising that for something that's quite complex, there are so many different definitions that exist and are available to us around happiness. And whilst happiness represents one of our biggest goals as human beings, it is totally a subjective experience. And of course, there are different ways in which happiness is represented to us, expectations from other people, what is shared in the news perhaps, or expectations of our own self and our own life and what we want to achieve. And our happiness depends on many things. Your state changes depending on how you react to changes in your career, your relationships, your personal life. But we're actually more often in control of our happiness than we think we are. We can cultivate what makes us happy through a set of strategies and behaviours that we can then subsequently practice. And happiness is directly linked with our mental health and our sense of well-being. But whatever our subjective view is of happiness, in March 2019, happiness for the UK had marginally increased. Of course, we're a year later and dealing with a pandemic, and that may well change now. But despite our subjective views, reducing poor mental health has been shown to increase our happiness. So focusing on trying to reduce our feelings associated to things like anxiety and depression and stress can play a huge part in affecting our happiness and how we feel. And research continues to show that the things that matter most for our happiness and us is our social relationships, mental health, and physical health. And in fact, I think COVID has taught us, if COVID has taught us anything, it's absolutely we've learned the value of social relationships. And the statistics will tell us that 1 in 4 people will be affected by poor mental health. And I would imagine this is going to increase with COVID. But if I asked you to raise your hand if you'd ever been off work for physical illness, or if you've ever been to the doctors, or if you've ever even been to the dentist, you would probably put your hand up and say, yes, I have, or at least I hope you have. And if I asked you if you'd seen a mental health professional, if you've taken time off work because of poor mental health, or whether you've even taken medication for it, some of us will put our hands up and say, yes, we have. But some of us will still have that heavy feeling in the pit of our stomach and just aren't quite there yet with raising our hands and saying we have. But that's okay. But if I ask you to raise your hand if you know of someone, whether that's a friend, a family member, a colleague, your neighbour who suffers from poor mental health, I think we would all have our hands up. You see, it's not 1 in 4, it's 1 in 1. All of us are impacted by poor mental health in one way or another. And we are all affected in different ways through different circumstances and different situations, and none more so than through the impact of COVID-19. And COVID has really challenged the way we think about mental health in the workplace, but also as individuals. You know, we saw a real wave of focus on well-being as the pandemic grew, and we all found this common ground when we went into this UK-wide lockdown. We were all in it together. We found solace in knowing others were going through it too. And there was this great sense of camaraderie and solidarity. There was greater support, and we were extending our hands to people that needed it the most. We were working from kitchens, from floors, from stairwells, making makeshift laptop stands, you know, juggling children and homeschooling, amongst many other challenges and that we've had to face and contend with. And for those of us with existing mental illnesses such as anxiety, COVID would have likely exacerbated some of those feelings we had. For battling depression, social isolation may well have meant it became much easier to fall deeper into that illness. But even without existing conditions, we were all challenged in many different ways with our own mental health. Fears of the unknown, anxiety over what may or may not happen. You know, for many of us who had existing ways of coping, the pandemic presented new or even enhanced stressors, and as a result, perhaps challenged some of our existing approaches we took to managing those situations. Social isolation and that separation from family and friends and loved ones has been really, really difficult. The relationships is one of the most valuable and most important things to our sense of well-being. And with local lockdowns a part of the ongoing strategy, social isolation and the indirect onward challenges this could face for individuals is something we're going to have to consider for some time yet. In many instances, there'll be people that were working not really from suitable desk environments where musculoskeletal problems may well be likely. Work creep has been a real challenge. You know, it is almost inevitable as the lines between work and home became even more blurred. And many of us will have found it really, really difficult to truly switch off. Generally, as a population, our alcohol intake has increased, which can really impact our sleep, of course, and our motivation and our focus. We've questioned our sense of purpose, and many of us will have faced financial hardship in lots of different ways, and will continue to with partners, whether they've got reduced wages from furlough or perhaps even reduced salary. So there's definitely going to be some challenges yet to come when it comes to COVID. But of course, there may well be some positives that we can glean. You know, we were grateful for some of the most simplest things. We found a new appreciation for our neighbours. We extended our hands to help people who were most vulnerable. Many people volunteering or taking on key worker responsibilities. The sky was bluer with CO2 emissions being reduced. The air became clearer. And of course, there was lots of pictures coming out of animals that were venturing into towns while so many of them were quiet. We found new ways to communicate and found that relationships and staying connected was one of the most special things in our lives. And many of us used the time to reflect on where we were, where we wanted to be in life, what we wanted to be doing. And that may have led to new adventures and new opportunities, and it may still lead to those new adventures and new opportunities. But in order to understand how we can look after our well-being, we just need to understand a little bit more around mental health. Now, we all have mental health just like we have physical health, and our mental health exists on this continuum, affected by different things and different situations and different interventions that we are evoking and that are happening within our lives. And we have to balance it, or at least we have to try and balance it all the time when different situations are happening to us. And when we think about health, actually, if we remove the terms of mental health and physical health, what we're really thinking about is how we feel, how we think, and how that directs and affects how we act and what our body is doing as a result. And I'll give you an example. So if you attend a course and the trainer says to you there's going to be a test at the end of that course, you might think, oh my God, I won't be able to do this. You might start to feel a little bit panicky, and as a result, you may start to take a little bit more attention, pay a little bit more attention, maybe take notes, or you may even withdraw from that training thinking that you're going to fail anyway. So what's the point of even trying? And your body, well, you might have heart palpitations, you might have sweating palms, perhaps you've started an obsessive action like clicking of the pens, biting nails, shaking your leg. All of these are triggered by the simple sentence of saying there might be a test or an exam that triggers a specific response within you. And we are reacting to these things that are happening in the world all the time, consciously and unconsciously. And it is triggering emotions and feelings and helping to direct how we think and how we subsequently behave. And there are so many different cues in the world that are based upon our own cultures, our own backgrounds, and our own experiences, that when they happen, they trigger those specific feelings, emotions, and actions. And if we all have mental health, just like we have physical health, then should we be looking after it in the same way as we do with our physical health? So let's just think about our physical health here for a second. We do things every single day to look after our physical health, either to recover when it becomes damaged or to prevent it from hurting, getting unwell, or actually becoming damaged. We try to sleep because we know if we don't, then we won't be able to do much the following day. When we cut ourselves, we sometimes have to put antiseptic wipes on it or to prevent it from becoming infected. And then we have to put a plaster on it to protect it and to help it to heal. When we go out cycling, we have to put a helmet on because if we have an accident, we know that one of the most damaging places is going to be our head. So we take those precautions to try and protect ourselves physically. We may take vitamins. We might try to eat a balanced diet because it keeps us regular. We drink water when we have a headache, or maybe even take paracetamols. We might do physical exercise because we know it can reduce things like heart disease. We brush our teeth every morning so that our teeth don't fall out. We check our bits and bobs for lumps to prevent or catch cancer early on in treatment. And when we pull a muscle, or we hurt our ankle, or we hurt our back, or whatever it is, we put ice on it or we put heat on it, and we are told that we must rest it. There are so many things that we're doing every single day, whether we have connected the dots to its impact on our physical health or not. Things that we are doing every single day to support our physical health. And doing these things helps to keep us healthy. It makes us feel good, and it helps to make us feel happy. And that's exactly how we want to think about it when it comes to our mental health. Things that we are doing every single day that helps to prevent mental ill health, to keep us mentally fit and healthy, or to recover when we have been mentally affected in one way or another. When we feel overwhelmed, we might need to take some time out or direct our attention to a hobby, something that we love to do. When we're anxious, we might use calming exercises to help reduce those feelings. Maybe we'll go for a run or a walk, which might just help calm us down or even help to clear our head. And when we have those difficult days at work and we feel absolutely exhausted, we need to take the time to rest. Just like when we pull a muscle or we hurt ourselves, we put ice on it or heat on it and we rest. And that's the same when our brain is exhausted. Okay, we don't put ice on it and we don't put heat on it. We instead inject it with something we love and we enjoy and we rest. And how we are affected within our mental health is really, really varied. The different signs and symptoms that manifest are extreme. And there's so many different ways in which we might be able to identify in ourselves when we're struggling. But one of the hardest things for us to do is to actually identify when we might be struggling. And it's more likely that somebody that you know is going to recognize that perhaps before you even do. We're not great at spotting the signs. If we do, sometimes we ignore them or we pass them off as just being part and parcel of the situation or the event that we're doing. And actually, if we just keep going, then it's going to be fine at the end of it. And actually, there's different ways in which we can start to think about reflecting on how we're feeling. So we aren't quite as good as thinking about our mental health as well as we are when it comes to our physical health. And there's loads of different reasons why we don't see it as important. one of those biggest issues is going to be the stigma attached to thinking about mental health, or all of those types of things will contribute to our views around why we don't do more when it comes to our mental health. So we have to think about it perhaps a little differently. We have to put it on the radar. We have to take specific action to look at what we can do when it comes to wellness and well-being. And in times when we need it most, it's so critical that we have this plethora of things we know that we can lean on that makes such a difference. And in the same way, when we cut ourselves, we bring out that antiseptic wipe and plasters, we need to do exactly the same when it comes to our mental health, doing things that make us feel better for the circumstances that we're in. And that's why we're creating a wellness action plan, to be part of prevention, to make us feel good, to help make us feel happier, a proactive and practical way to support our mental health and well-being. Now, creating a wellness action plan is useful for absolutely anybody, whether you have mental health problems or not. It really helps us to identify what helps to keep us well at work, but also personally in life. And also, if we're experiencing mental health problems, what we can do to draw on that might be able to help us. Now, to start with, it's really important that we take stock of how we're feeling. And I mentioned earlier on that sometimes we're just not so good at identifying the signs and symptoms within ourselves. So here I've got a scale, it's called a perceived stress scale. And we're going to fill it in. And we're going to focus on stress because all of us can relate to being stressed at one point in our life for lots of different reasons. So we're going to use it specifically for stress. Now, in a number of studies, research has shown that 74% of people have felt so stressed that they have felt unable to cope. And over 30% of adults said they have experienced suicidal feelings as a result of feeling stressed. And self-harm is often a feature that people use to help cope with it, even in adults. And perhaps many of us would think that's perhaps something that younger generation do, but in adults, self-harm can be one of those negative consequences. So there are 10 questions in total. These are the first 6. So on a scale of, for never, almost never, sometimes fairly often, very often, in the last month, how often have you been upset with something that happened unexpectedly? So just give yourself that score associated that word. How often have you felt that you were unable to control the important things in your life? How often have you felt nervous or stressed? This is all in the last month. How often have you felt confident about your ability to handle your personal problems? How often have you felt things were going your way? And how often have you found that you could not cope with all the things that you had to do? Make sure you've got an answer for each of those. And these are the final 4. So how often have you been able to control irritations in your life? How often have you felt that you were on top of things? How often have you been angered because of things that were outside of your control? How often have you felt difficulties were piling up so high that you could not overcome them? Now, once you have a response to each of those, I want you to reverse the scores to questions 4, 5, 7, and 8. So if you have scored 0, it's now 4. If you scored 1, it's now 3, and so on. And then I want you to combine that score from those questions with the rest of the questions that you answered. Now, before I give you the scores, it's just really important to note that this scale is to help with reflecting on how you're doing right now. We aren't always very good with being able to say how we are and where we are, and we find ways to avoid it. We carry on as we would usually do, hoping that it goes away. So these questions, if answered truthfully, can really help to give that realization moment of actually things are a bit challenging right now, or actually I'm doing okay despite things that have been happening. So hopefully you've all got your scores. Now the scores are going to be anywhere between 0 and 40. So higher scores indicate higher feelings of stress, but scores ranging between 0 and 13 would be considered low stress. 14 to 26 is classed as moderate stress, and 27 plus would be classed as high stress. Now, if you want to share your scores in the chat, you can absolutely do so, but of course it's also Perfectly okay. If you don't, someone's asked if I can just go back to the previous slides. I'm just going to come back there, hoping that you've got the answers to all of those. Just give us another 30 seconds. And the questions we're inverting are 4, 5, 7, and 8. And I put it in the chat so you've got it. Okay, so just as a reminder, the scores should be anywhere between 0 and 40. So you're adding up all of those totals once you've done those, once you've reversed those scores. 0 to 13 considered low stress, 14 to 26 moderate stress, and 27 plus would be high stress. So you will know right now where you are slotting in to those areas. Now, an extension of this exercise is of course to really start thinking about what is contributing to how you are feeling, and those questions are almost guiding questions to think, okay, well, if I've answered a particular question that I'm being angered because things are outside of control, you know as an individual that that's an area that perhaps you need to be thinking about when it comes to helping to reduce feelings of stress and those difficult challenges that you're facing. Now, like I said, this is a reflection of how you are right here and right now. Things are changing all the time. Our mental health and our well-being is changing all the time, and it's responding to those different situations and events that are happening across our lives. So you might do this in another week's time, and actually your state of mind might be very, very different. So it's giving you a state of how you're feeling right here, right now, at this very given time, and that is subject to change. So once we know our perceived stress score, once we've self-reflected on those types of that, we now need to think about what we do that helps to keep us mentally healthy. So what do you do that helps you stay mentally healthy? Do you know what helps? Perhaps in the chat, maybe you could put a couple of words on things that you would do that helps to keep you mentally healthy. I'd love to hear people's ideas and suggestions. And the beauty is there's so much choice and variety that is really, really accessible when we're thinking about our well-being. So much that that is accessible to us now. Things that we can try to take care of our well-being. And some of the comments in the chat is connecting with something you've loved, walking before breakfast and again after work, exercise, and connecting with nature, doing some HIIT sessions, high interval training. Fantastic ideas there. But it's not always easy to get started when we're thinking about our well-being. You know, it's often one of those things that we know makes us feel good, but actually becomes something we don't have time for when we get brought into the daily events. In fact, it's probably one of the first things that go off our to-do list when we're trying to battle everything that we've got going on in the day. And it's often one of those things that whilst we know makes us feel good, sometimes it can be a little bit of an effort to do it, but the benefits are so significant. When we're stressed and we have so much to do, deadlines to achieve, family demands, shopping to do, and we feel like we haven't got time to breathe, let alone stop. You know, sometimes we feel guilty if we indulge in something positive when there is so much to do. When we're feeling low, it can feel difficult to take that positive action. Maybe we don't feel like we have the energy, so we give the gym a miss because we just can't be bothered. But we know that when we go to the gym, it does make us feel good. It makes us feel energized. It reduces the feelings of stress. It releases that feel-good chemical in our body. So we know it has benefits, but sometimes trying to get ourselves to go there can be really challenging. But when we're feeling low, when we're feeling worried, when we're feeling anxious, when we're feeling overwhelmed, when we're feeling stressed, it is actually at this point that we need those positive interventions more than ever. And often when we don't take those actions, those feelings can begin to affect our physical health. We don't take action when we know we need to, it can impact our physical health. I'm just going to quickly explore what I mean by that. So remember earlier we explored this idea that that how we feel, how we think, and how we act are interconnected. And one of the other components of that is how it affects our body. So if we use stress as an example, let's explore quickly what's happening in the body when we feel stress. So we all have a stress response system within our body, and when it's triggered, there's chemical messages that are sent to various places across our body. sends messages to our brain through the blood, and it produces this stress hormone. And it's effectively telling the brain and the body to react and respond to the potential trigger or the stress that is causing us. So it sends things to the pituitary glands, for example, which is responsible for pain, which is responsible for temperature. So, for example, if you were plunged into freezing cold water, the stress would trigger a specific response, and it would try to adjust our temperature to help defend against that specifically cold water. And then there is hormones that are impacted. So things that send messages to our body that tell our body and different parts of our system to start to slow down or start to increase in action, dependent upon what the situation is. So if you're faced with a lion in front of you, for example, you are sending messages to your body that says, I'm either going to run away from this really, really quickly, so I've got to get my body moving, or I'm preparing to fight. And as a result of that, some of your non-essential systems are going to shut down. So things like your digestion and your immune system, things that you're not going to need at this given point when this stress trigger is there. Your essential systems start to ramp up. So things like your cardiovascular system are getting ready to take specific action. And there's going to be physical preparation. So your pupils are going to be dilating, it's clearing your airways, it's getting your muscles ready, and your brain prepared to fight or to run away from whatever the situation is. And these responses are really fantastic and really helpful when we're in kind of that fight or flight mode. But in so many instances now, we just don't need to fight or run in the same way that we used to. We're certainly not going to be facing any lions anytime soon. But every time we encounter stress, our body is responding in exactly the same way, just as if there was a lion in front of us. And of course, if we stay stressed, so if we stay stressed for a long period of time with our non-essential systems shutting down, things like our digestive system, things like our immune system, that's going to potentially lead to serious repercussions in our body. And here are just some examples. Okay, so there's going to be a whole range of different experiences and impacts on the body, from high blood pressure through to fertility problems to heightening the risk of a heart attack. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that when we get stressed, this is going to happen. But if we continue to ignore the signs, if we don't listen to what's happening with our minds and with our body, we could end up with needing to deal with other problems too. Now, of course, how we are affected is all different. How mental health affects us is very, very different. You know, for me, as an example, when I'm particularly stressed, I don't sleep very well. And I also suffer from psoriasis as a skin condition. And when I experience extreme stress, it was at its worst. And it's never going to go away because of that intense stress that I experienced at a younger age. So our body is going to be responding all the time to those different scenarios. And you will know where your body or how your body often responds, but sometimes we don't always see the correlation directly back to being associated to stress. So let's explore what we can do to try and prevent, to intervene, and to promote positive well-being. And here is the wheel of well-being, which includes all the core elements that contributes and which can really influence our well-being. So being aware, all about being focused on the present moment, how we offer support and give our help to others. Nutrition, so the things that we're putting inside our bodies. And that includes things like alcohol, how we connect with other people, so really focusing on our social relationships across our friends, our families, and our colleagues' network. Thinking about our emotional state, so thinking about how we're feeling and being able to effectively manage our feelings. Our learning and development, so what we're doing with our own personal journey with learning and development. What are we doing to invest in our own development and how that can impact our well-being? The environment plays a huge role, and we're going to explore that in a little while, in thinking about our relationship with the environment, things like recycling, our love of outdoor spaces, and how we can connect better with nature. And I know nature was one of the comments that was made earlier when it comes to well-being. Finance, so financially being able to support ourselves and being able to live without significant detriment to our lives. So that plays a big part, and having that safety and security. Some of the words we talked about and people shared when we asked the question of what it means to be happy. Spiritual, so that's all about exploring religion, but also faith. So it might not be religion, it might actually be a faith. And in some instances, spirituality is not just about religion, it's much more than that. And what we can do about being physically active, how active we are in a given week and a month. And these are all things that can positively affect our well-being. But sometimes it's really easy to feel overwhelmed, particularly when we are feeling low. So I try to keep it really simple and use these 4 to focus. Find ways to spend time and connect with looking after yourself. Find ways to spend time and connect with looking after yourself. Now, the beauty of this 4-step approach is that we can start off gradually, trying things to find what we are comfortable with. And as we find what works and what doesn't, we can start to naturally bring in all of those other different areas of well-being. But what we want to do is really focus on what makes a real difference, what the science tells us makes a really valuable difference to how we feel, our sense of well-being, and how happy we are. So my 4 areas are: find ways to relax and reduce stress, spend time within the environment and with nature, connecting with others around us, and looking after our physical health. So let's just explore those in a little bit more detail. Relaxing helps us to connect with the present moment, and that has been found to be really beneficial in helping to regain focus, helping to direct our focus and reduce difficult feelings that we may well have. Now, it's not going to mean that those difficult situations we have go away, but through a series of mechanisms and approaches, what we can do is affect how we feel. It can help to reduce those difficult feelings and emotions, and it can help us to regain that sense of control. It can give us that breathing space that we so often need when we feel overwhelmed or feel unable to cope. And relaxation techniques cuts right through all of that, giving the brain and the body cues that we need to slow down, that we need to just take a few moments, and we need to find a sense of calm, sense of peace, and even a sense of enjoyment. Now, the beauty is that we can lean on these in so many different ways. So having a relaxing bath once a week to finish off a weekend, reading one of your favorite books before you go to bed, practicing mindfulness when we have a few minutes in the day, taking breaks regularly throughout the day. Now, a change of scenery can really help to relax and relieve feelings of anxiety. Going for a run in the morning might help just to set us up for the day. And these are just ideas. You will have your own. And the trick is to identify what really makes a difference to you and see how it can be adopted into everyday life, anytime and anywhere. Now, if there's something that helps us to relax, the key is to try and find time to fit it in your day. So on a piece of paper or on a Word document in front of you, whatever, I would like you just to write down a few things that you know helps you to relax. Could be a glass of wine in the evening. Might be spending time with your family. It might be giving your friend a call. There'll be lots of different things that you will do that helps you to relax. Now, we know that an unpleasant environment can create stress, maybe even make us feel sad. You know, toxic environments, cultures where we don't feel very valued, or being micromanaged, different home lives, challenges within that home life. All of these things that are happening in the environment really do affect us. But if we can be negatively affected and influenced by the environment around us when it's bad, then it must have a positive effect on us when we are in a good environment. Now, research continues to show that being surrounded in nature has a really calming effect on us. Even just viewing scenes of nature has been found to reduce anger, to reduce fear, to reduce stress, and can actually help increase that feeling of a sense of calm just by looking at pictures. And again, here is a selection of ideas. And it's all about trying to find something that suits you. And maybe in this list, there's a few things that you might think, I might try that. You take a walk in your local park, eat meals outdoors, although the weather has now changed, so you might need to take a few umbrellas. Exercise outside, sit by the window and just look out into the environment and note what you can see. You bring some flowers into the home or into your office space if you don't have that garden. And even if you do, you will be surprised on how beneficial and how much it will make you feel better. You could volunteer for your local conservation project, or you could build an animal habitat. Hedgehogs are really in need this time of year, so it's a really lovely thing to do, particularly when you've got younger children, and get them involved in being connected with nature. And one of my favorite things to do in the morning is just to sit outside with a cup of tea and just listen to what's happening around me. And I can usually hear the robin, the rain hitting the ground recently. You know, sometimes I can hear the wind, I can hear some background noise as parents are taking their children off to the primary school just behind me. You know, and it gives me that sense of calm. Nature has a real powerful way of healing, soothing and restoring us, not only in its own world, but also in our world too. And in a recent study that was conducted by Mind, actually, 95% of the people that were interviewed found their mood improved after spending time outside, changing from a stress state to a more calm and balanced state of mind. So we know the evidence is there that tells us it's just finding a way that you can connect with it and be part of the outdoors. So how do you or can you spend more time in the environment and with nature? And again, I'd like you to start thinking about ways in which you can do that. Connecting with others, relationships and connecting with others is shown to be the most important component of well-being. Having good relationships in our lives really, really matters. Now, of course, we can't always have great relationships in every part of our lives. I get it. Sometimes we do have difficult relationships, and not all of our relationships are positive for us, and I understand that. So this isn't about focusing on those difficult or challenging relationships. This is really about leveraging the positive ones and the positive connections that we have in our lives and building new ones. And Harvard's longest running study associated to this ran over 80 years, starting with after the Great Depression in 1938, and found throughout that span of that whole entire study that the relationships and the connections we form protect us from lots of life challenges. They contribute to delays in things like mental and physical health decline, and are better predictors of happy lives, all by the connections and the relationships that we build. Our relationships in our lives are often more important to our mental health than we realise. And I mentioned earlier, of course, COVID-19 may well have changed our perspectives on the value we see of connecting with people. And not only do they provide incredible support during times of great difficulty, relationships we share with our loved ones, our friends, our colleagues, and the connections we have absolutely underpin our lives. But how we interact and form relationships has definitely evolved over the years. You know, family structures, the demand for online technologies, longer working hours perhaps. So how we connect and who we connect with often changes as the way the world changes. And finding different ways to really connect can be so valuable. Volunteering, for an example, has a really profound effect on our well-being. You know, it's a hugely social activity. It keeps us in regular contact with other people. We get to meet new people. And of course, it provides us with a great sense of purpose. In many respects, it keeps us physically active, depending on what type of volunteering that you're doing. So it can actually be really, really beneficial. And of course, regular contact with others helps to develop that existing support system, protecting against things like depression and reducing the effects of stress and anxiety and anger and anxiety. There's a really great way of us thinking about how do we explore our relationships and what value they can bring us in our lives when it comes to well-being. Now, when we think about our physical health, what we're thinking about is what we're putting in. So things like our nutrition and how we're keeping ourselves healthy and the types of physical activity that we're doing. And when it comes to our physical health, actually, what we want to be doing is moving more and sitting down less. So doing physical activity has long been associated with benefits to our physical health, but also to our mental health. And I'd be surprised if you hadn't seen research or knew that how beneficial physical health could be when it comes to our mental health. But the guidance is that over a course of a week, activity should at least add up to 2.5 hours of moderate intensity. 2.5 hours. How often do you do physical activity over a given week? Just in the chat, just comment on minutes and hours if you can, and let me know how many hours you do. Physical inactivity contributes to 1 in 6 deaths in the UK, the same as smoking. And it's been shown to reduce the risk of dementia, but also things like depression. It helps to decrease work errors, headaches, confusion, anxiety, phobias, tension and anger. It can help to improve things like memory, perception, cognitive functioning, self-control, body image, emotional stability, assertiveness, confidence, performance academically, our efficiency in our work and sexual satisfaction, and few what a list of things that the benefits are for physical activity. And there's loads of comments coming through now. 4 hours, 5 hours, 3 to 4, 3 hours, 6 hours. Lots of variance in terms of how often people are exercising. Now, the most common reason for not doing physical activity is work commitments. And over 2/3 of adults said that actually they would like to be more physically active. And 1 in 4 women are classed as physically inactive, and 1 in 5 men are classed as physically inactive. So where do you start? Well, being physically active tends to be easier if you choose an activity that you really enjoy and that fits into your daily life. So I really, really do not like running. I don't get along with it, so I don't do it. So I have to choose something that's slightly different. So I do cycling and I go to a spin class, and that's much better for how I feel. Because if I was told I had to run every single day, I'd really struggle, and actually I'd give up pretty quickly. Now, there is no problem with starting with a 10-minute walk once a day and gradually building it up if you're not really doing much physical activity today. There is absolutely no problem with that. This is your race. It's not anybody else's race. So you start where you're most comfortable with. And there's lots of different things that we can try. So you can try things like walking, dancing, going to the gyms, doing seated exercises. Perhaps it's just even sitting less. So every time you get a phone call on your mobile, instead of taking it at your desk, you move away from your desk and you take a walk around the garden or around your front room. Now, all of those things are starting to just to get the body a little bit more physically active and get us moving, get us sitting less. And that is absolutely the key. And now, one of the things over these 4 key areas is that when we start to carry out specific activities within that wellbeing space, actually, there'll be so much overlap and there'll be so much benefits that we're bringing in. So when we think about volunteering, it's going to be great for building relationships. It might be great for getting us outdoors. It might be great for getting us physically active, and it might be really good for our relaxation. But actually, we also know that giving to people and volunteering and helping support people is also really beneficial to our well-being and our sense of mental health. So by trying to take very small steps in a few number of areas, actually we can start to realize bigger benefits quicker. Now, one of the most important things that we must do when we're thinking about our wellbeing action plan is to do more of what makes you happy. Whether that is things that help you to relax, whether that is the types of physical exercise that we do, doing more of what makes us happy will absolutely affect our well-being. Now, I can't tell you what you need to do. I can share with you advice and recommendations, and I can give you the information and the support and show you the science around it and give you the statistics. But I can't make you do that. It comes down to choice, it comes down to you, and only you know what you can do, and you need to decide. And if you need help with understanding what's available, then of course there is always help available to support you. But only try what feels comfortable. Give yourself time to figure out what works for you and go at your own pace with those types of things. Take small steps. Pick 1 or 2 things that feel really achievable first before moving on to try other things. If you want to run a marathon, you're going to have to start with running very short distances to be able to build up your stamina and build up your ability to be able to do those types of things. So you've got to start with small steps first before you go to the higher levels. And the key is to find ways to bring it into your everyday. Something that you enjoy, something that doesn't make it hard work for you to do it, something that you find a lot of enjoyment, and something that makes you happy. Now, we've explored a number of ways in which we can think about well-being, but ultimately it comes down to you, and you can only do what it feels comfortable. And you have to give yourself that time to figure it out. When I suffered with depression for a long time in my life, I wish I knew some of the things that I do now when it comes to finding those interventions, because actually that may have changed my path a little bit. But right here, right now, I'd like you to make a commitment to your well-being, to show kindness to yourself. And I just want you to think of one thing that you are going to do that will help to keep you mentally healthy. Just one thing. I'd like you to write it down. I'd like you to share it in the chat. If you'd like to share it in the chat with me, that'd be wonderful. One thing, what can you commit to? What will you do? Will you take more breaks? Will you try mindfulness? Will you download the Couch to 5K app? Will you pick up that book you've promised yourself recently? So write it down. Read more and write more fiction. Lovely, I love that. Writing is so great for our well-being. Journaling, really wonderful way of looking after our well-being. Taking more breaks, absolutely, really important. So when we write something down, it becomes a little bit more real. It makes it a little bit more accountable to ourselves. Be in the moment more. Yeah, really lovely. Taking a lunch break. Really, breaks are so good for us, taking that change of scenery, helping to redirect our focus, helping to give us that state of energy back again, doing walking more. Take the time to enjoy nature. Beautiful time of the year as we head into autumn. The leaves are changing, the trees are soon to be bare, lots of different things happening. So one of the comments is, we talk a lot of things about the positive things. Should we also consider things that we should stop doing? Yeah, absolutely. Of course, there's always things that are negative interventions that we use that we think that are going to help us in one way or another. Particularly things like our alcohol intake. That's always going to be something that is features. And as I mentioned, in COVID-19, our alcohol intake generally increased. And I can put my hand up and say, every time Boris Johnson came on to do his daily announcement, I'm pretty sure I had a glass of wine in my hand at the time that it was happening, because it was quite stressful. And that's as a resource that I went to. So now I've gone through months of where I've had to go no alcohol, just so that it took my body that cleansing. So it's really important to recognize, of course, some of those negative consequences and negative interventions that we use as part of our well-being. So there's just a few more comments coming through. So one of the comments that I'm just looking at here is sometimes when people are feeling really, really overwhelmed in a particular situation, actually physically moving becomes really, really difficult to do, because there's lack of energy. We don't have the energy to be able to do those types of things. We don't have the focus. We don't have the motivation to be able to sometimes even get ourselves out of bed. And the trick isn't to put the expectation on ourselves that we should achieve what we were achieving in previous days when we weren't feeling so overwhelmed. So actually, instead of doing being able to walk for 1 mile, actually maybe the goal is we walk for 1/10 of a mile or half a mile. Perhaps even if we can't physically get ourselves out of bed, maybe it's small movements with our body. So doing things whilst we're lying down, doing things whilst we're sat up in a sitting position, things that we can encourage our body to actively move without having to exert too much pressure on ourselves, and to put our expectation on, because of course that's another thing that's going to impact how we're feeling and our well-being, is if we put that expectation on ourselves that we should be able to achieve something and we don't, that can often impact us a little. Now, creating your well-being action plan, we started with self-reflecting. We used the perceived stress scale. We thought about how we'd felt over the past month. Now, your takeaway from that is really to start exploring the types of situations that are causing you to feel that way. Finding ways to spend time and connecting with looking after yourself. And we've explored some of the ways in which you can support your own well-being, and you've made one of those commitments today to do one thing every week, or at least try something new. Find ways to spend time and connect with looking after yourself. Now, when we think about the support around us, lean on the relationships, of course, and the connections, but it's really important to note that if you are really struggling with your mental health, there is always support available. And of course, you can apply this approach, what things that you do for your own well-being, in lots of different scenarios. So in a work context, the questions you might ask are, how am I feeling with what's happening in work in the last 30 days or the past few weeks? What are the things that I can do in work that support me with my mental well-being? Who can I speak to? What support do I need from those around me, from my colleagues or from my line manager? Those are the types of questions you can be asking within a workspace. But actually, it's really important to remember the external support. And here's just a selection of some of the things that are available today. Mind have some great online information. Samaritans available 24/7, 365 days of the year. There's advice lines, bereavement care, a stress busting website looking at your mind plan. Now that's really fantastic. which you can access via Every Mind Matters. It sends you personalised tips and advice to your email, so based on your own circumstances and your own situations, and of course you can change it anytime. So it's really real, you know, in a real-time moment, can give you some suggestions that are completely personalised to you and your circumstances. Now, I love this graphic, and I can't take credit for it, unfortunately. I wish I could, but it's just so, it's totally brilliant and totally sums up what we think sometimes in life, not just for productivity, but often for most things. You see, when we're feeling stressed and busy and we're feeling overwhelmed, we think that we haven't got time to do that workout. We think we have to keep going with work, or maybe we think, you know, I'll call my friend tomorrow because actually I'm really tired. Sometimes we make easy excuses, and we end up filling our day with all the things that continues to fill us with anxiety or sadness or busyness, just because if I get to the end of it, then I'll feel fine. And inevitably, it rarely ever works. You know, we have to find that balance, because the one thing that is going to make you feel better is the one thing that you took off your list as something that you didn't think was necessary that day. Which is why this graphic was never more true. You know, we will feel so much better with the different challenges we have in life if we consider the importance of our well-being and the mix of that. And sometimes we do have to adapt what our well-being strategies are. We do have to look at our interventions and see whether or not we need to make changes based on our emotional response in exactly the same way we would when it comes to our physical health. And we need to do that as individuals to help ourselves. Now, as we start to draw the session to an end, I'd like you to think of 3 things that you're grateful for today. I just want you to finish this sentence. 3 things I am grateful for. And you can share one of those in the chat if you'd like. And it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be really broad things. It can be really, really specific. The smaller and the simpler they are, the greater the meaning it will have to you, and the greater the impact it will have on your well-being. 3 things that you are grateful for. And in the chat, just talking about the expectations and putting those expectations on yourself. And actually, this type of exercise and activity is really great for cutting through some of that and removing some of that pressure that we often apply ourselves to those expectations. 3 things I am grateful for. Just finish that sentence. That's something you can do every day. You can do it first thing in the morning, you could do it last thing at night or midday. You know, we really underestimate how good a simple strategy like this can be when we adopt it as part of our everyday life. And you can also extend it into the workplace. You know, you can think about ways to express gratitude towards your colleagues and your connections. But just spend a few minutes. Variable weather, I love it. Definitely good. Family, health, opportunity, really great things. 3 things. Now, we've covered quite a bit today, and I hope you're able to take away a few things. If nothing more, I hope it's encouraged you just to self-reflect and just to think a little bit more about your own well-being. You might not have all the answers to your questions for it, but I hope it starts you on that path of thinking about what can you be doing differently, what new things can you be doing, what things do you have to reevaluate in your life when it comes to building your own wellbeing action plan. So I'm going to open it up to questions and just see if we've got any come through on the chat, or if anybody wants to speak up and on the phone lines. That's absolutely fine. You know, looking after our well-being has never been more important, and it starts with being kind to yourself and giving yourself the time to figure out what works for you, going at your own pace, at your own time, and just trying those different things to see what works for you, and trying those things, you know, and take small steps. Pick 1 or 2 things that feel achievable first. And Mind has come out with their focus for this week being a mental health week, and their focus is just do 1 thing. That's exactly their strategy. They're focusing on this, is just doing 1 thing. And we've made those commitments. We've given ourselves just that 1 thing to think about. Make that commitment, find the time to do it before moving on to try other things and setting your expectations too high until you're ready to do that. And this quote has never been more true. You know, you can't pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself first is absolutely critical. So I'm happy to take any questions, whether that is on the chat or whether that is on, if you want to open your line, more than happy. And throughout the session, I've got a few private chats. So, you know, if people do want to get in contact with me, or they want to talk about their specific situations and circumstances and the different challenges that they're going through, and they just might need a little bit more help and support that's more specific and tailored to them, by all means, you can get in contact with me. I'd be more than happy to have a chat with you and just to explore what's happening for you and where we can look at supporting you. So thank you to those that did message me privately and did explore, you know, things that were happening for them today, and by all means get in contact. So I've had a question. Helen, are you seeing more businesses understand the importance of mental well-being? Yes, absolutely. COVID-19 has definitely brought mental health and well-being into the spotlight a little bit more, and it's really, really great that companies thought about it. I suppose from a mental health professional perspective, there was a real great focus initially when we went into the pandemic, particularly in businesses and workplaces where the focus was on well-being. For me, it's about now keeping that momentum going. So it's great to see, you know, events like this and the GreenJam activities happening that are focusing on well-being and continuing to see the importance of that, because actually, you know, COVID aside, mental health issues were was the biggest health crisis affecting our population today. So it's great to see more businesses doing more activity around this space. I think for me, it's about keeping that momentum going.
Helen, this is Matt. I have a quick question. Have you noticed any trends in people that you've been speaking to, just in terms of, not because obviously COVID's had an impact, but just in terms of sort of age, gender, job role, and people that are more open to kind of exploring this?
So I think some of the biggest impacting sectors have been things like the hospitality sector, as well as the event sector. I've certainly seen an increase in terms of the types of support that companies are looking for in that area, because there are a lot of companies have been placing people at the risk of redundancies, and that's obviously caused some ongoing impact. From an age perspective, there's not really a huge amount of data right now available to us when it comes to COVID and mental health, because we're so in the mix of it still. We're still trying to get that data and still trying to get that research that is available to us. So nothing around specific ages, but certainly in terms of businesses or industries, the events and the hospitality sector has suffered. That's not to say others haven't, and other companies and other businesses haven't been impacted by that. But that tends to be one of the biggest focus areas.
Okay, good. I know it's a stereotype, but I've seen a big shift in just like people that look like me, blokes my age. It just wasn't discussed at all, even just a few years ago. And it's quite ordinary now to sit in the pub with my friends and talk about this, where it just wouldn't have been a few years ago. So I think we've come a long way just in that pure fact, I think.
I think more people are talking about it and starting the conversation, and I think that's great. I mean, even, you know, I'm quite an active person on social media and LinkedIn, and of course I can see a lot of people at the moment that are looking for new employment and new jobs, but like you have seen, you know, an increase in the amount of people that are talking about how that's affecting them and how they're feeling in that process. And of course, you know, for a while that wouldn't have even been discussed or even been explored, and people are actively sharing how difficult, you know, some of the challenges are in their life, and being honest, but not just being honest for themselves, but also to help other people, you know, to see that other people are going through challenges and difficulties, and sometimes life can be really, really difficult, and sharing that, I think, has been something that I've seen an increase in, particularly in social media.
Helen, thanks so much for that. I think we're approaching our time limit. I know you had some questions privately. We'll send an email to everybody. So look, it is really interesting. I think undoubtedly the people that work in agencies just have a lot of kind of high workload. They're in busy environments, but to those stats I mentioned earlier, the one thing that we do have compared to a lot of other industries, we talk about it and we're open to fixing it. So I think that's a great thing. Thanks for giving up your time. This, to everybody else on the call, this is the start of our Festival of Happiness. This is the first event. We've got a lot more coming up. We've got about 6 or 7 sessions, I think, next week. A personal favourite of mine is the personal stories. So we're going to send everybody a link to the events that take part of and build up the Festival of Happiness in an email straight after this. So if you're around next week, have a look at the agenda and please register for some free events. Make sure you see the personal stories one on Monday, because I know some of the people are on it and they're very inspiring and great to listen to. Okay, I think we're all good. I was going to continue to work, but I can see my son is practicing his free kicks out in the garden, and I'm going to take time. I'm going to go out there and spend some time in the fresh air with him before I do any more work. So you've inspired me to do that at the very least. Okay, thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again, Helen. That was great.